what kinds of things do you find in terms of teaching dentists across North America and the world, for in that matter? What kinds of things what are the biggest stumbling blocks for we dentists in getting into this? What's the holdback?
The two biggest stumbling blocks we see here in the States are working with physicians and then billing to medical providers. And that's not quite the same issues that you have. There's no question about that. There are some very significant differences there. But I think this whole physician acceptance of oral appliance therapy, that still becomes an umbrella across all of North America, throughout Europe. I'm going to probably think, although I've only had experience, I've lectured in India and a few other countries on sleep, I would say it's probably around the world. Even when I lectured at the Southeast Asian Association of Sleep Medicine Conference, which was a medical conference, which they invited me to speak at in Punjab up in India, physicians are still like, does this really work? So that, they're asking us, does this work? It seems like it's really expensive, et cetera, things like that. And then dentists have often gone rogue with physicians and pretended to treat the patient for snoring instead of sleep apnea, and not done the medical testing, not worked with their medical counterparts. And so there's probably a bad taste in a lot of old physicians' mouths historically. And so that's probably the biggest stumbling block, I would say, is trying to work with physicians. And the good news, bad news about like that HRQ paper, and I know that's a US thing right now, but that's going to have a bigger impact. If physicians wake up and decide they can trust dentists and CPAP doesn't work, and they just changed 10% of their prescribing patterns, it would triple or quadruple the market for oral appliance therapy overnight, because they manage $4.5 billion in North America, and about 120 or $30 million worth of oral appliances are done. So a 10% shift in their market would be another $400 to $500 million worth of oral appliances that would be prescribed, and they still control the prescription side of all that business. So I think we're at a really, really great time, unfortunately, because of CPAP's not working. And they've been making them smaller and quieter and more efficient, and they still don't seem to work.
Okay, I understand that. But you also understand that it's a completely different economic model in Canada.
Yep, that's what I said.
And they don't control it. They just don't. They don't relate to us. They don't understand us. They don't seem to want to communicate with us. That's kind of what my feeling is.
And that's where this paper might be an opening for them. That if they again, if I said, and I don't want to repeat myself, but if they wake up and realize, hey, what we've been doing isn't working, we're the next best thing on the list.
Right. Well, I understand that. And some of the folks on tonight's calls have been following me since we started this academy. We formed ourselves in 2013, 2014, I think was our first meeting. And one of the reasons that I took on the challenge personally was most of us are trained either in the States or by brave Americans like you who come to teach us in Canada. And I'm sure about the last third of every presentation was, get out your pens, here's the billing code, here's how you do it. And we'd go home and go, oh my God, we can't get this covered in Canada. One of the reasons that I formed this academy was and I've heard this from a lot of mostly people on the industry side, doctors take these weekend courses and they come home and they want to make a sleep appliance. So they send me 2 impressions and what do we do? And I said, well, the reason I'm forming this academy is I can't afford any of our dental colleagues to get in trouble that way. And I guess I was a bit naive, and I said, well, I'm going to build this really big tent in Canada, and we're going to have all the players. We're going to have the physicians, the sleep docs, and the dental people, and the labs, and we're just going to be one big happy family, because that's what we are in Canada. We're a big happy family, and we're very nice, and we don't have many guns. And we've had 5 annual meetings. We've tried really hard at all levels, from our advisory council down, to invite physicians, to have sleep docs come. And it has been an abysmal failure to get any medical professional to simply come to the meeting, even for free, I even gave out an annual prize one year, and it never was used. This is mostly a dental academy with the word medical attached to it, but
Mm-hmm.
so, and I'm fairly well known. I've been doing this full time for 20 years. I've been involved in leadership. Most people know who Dave Rawson is. If I can't get people to come, and if my colleagues that I'm trying to mentor
Mm-hmm.
can't get, what are we doing wrong? Is it that different in Canada that docs just don't care because it's not the same economic model as in the States? Now we think sleep is still got some pharmaceutical influence under the table, or sur le tableau, as we say en français.
Oui.
When you sell a CPAP unit, you're selling ongoing maintenance. When you refer a patient to a dental appliance, they're gone. You don't see them anymore. There's no parts. You don't reline an appliance every year. You and I understand
Yeah.
that, but I'm in a university town. I go to the sleep rounds of my local hospital. I've given lectures there. And I have patients come and tell me, the sleep docs would say, oh, oral, no, don't do that. No, that's last resort. Here, you need CPAP. I had a patient with a 2.5 AHI be given a script for CPAP. It's a real case.
Well, the good news is that as we continue to provide data, as we continue to provide quality studies, as we continue to add compliance monitoring to the technology that we use, as we continue to make better devices and appliances, and you and I are gray enough in the hair that we may not see it fully in our lifetimes, but we're continuing to see the needle move a little bit in our direction. I think it's easier today. We see it's easier today to have those conversations with physicians than it was 10 years ago, and 10 years ago it was easier than 20 years ago. And I suspect it will be easier in a year and 5 years. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but David, we're moving so slowly. I joined the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, for example. That is the physicians group. There's a paltry number of dentists in that group, but that way I can be present with them at their meetings, talk with them at their meetings. I can choose to try to influence their behavior. Two of the posters and two of the abstracts that we did this year at ProSomnus, we have 8 total abstracts that are being published at the AADSM and at the AASM. That's the medical communities meeting. So on the AASM poster circuit will be Dr. Eddie Saul's poster on It's Ready for Prime Time Oral Appliances, and mine on the EVO IRB. That's a big step that the AASM is going to let two dental posters in about oral appliance therapy will be on their presentation display. So that, we're making small inroads. Baby steps.
Okay. Well, I think you're right. We may have departed this earth, and we'll look down, hopefully, and say, hey, they finally figured it out.
It's better than looking up and seeing it, that's for sure. I hope we are looking down. That'd be great.
That's for sure.
I like your perspective.
We have questions rolling in. The first one, patient selection is so critical. Could you expand? Can you talk about patient selection a bit more, maybe, Mark? Because for my colleagues who want to start this, it's always like, where do I start? Who do I start on? So for the person who's going to do the first case, what would you say about that?
So if I was getting started, I think it's far easier to try and treat mild and moderate patients than severe. If I was getting started, I would like to try and treat non-morbidly obese patients rather than really large morbidly obese patients. I would try to treat younger patients rather than older patients. When we look at that subset, that cohort, we find it seems to be much easier, much more successful to treat those populations of patients. If you could figure out ways to look at things like arousal threshold, if you could look at things like loop gain, and those are tricky to look at. Pharyngeal muscle dilator activity, again, tricky to look at. There are some breathing exercises you can do to test people's potential loop gain loss that they'll have. The low arousal threshold, if people say the slightest thing wakes me up, I'm getting up several times per night, and it's not to pee, you start to get suspicion. So those would be the things you'd say, those would not be great first patients for us to treat. So if I was getting started, I would try and segregate my first 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 patients the best I could at that easier to treat end. Having said that, I would also make sure that I was using comfortable bite recording techniques. I know that you and I've talked, and you've got a very comfortable phonetic position that you can put people into. That's a great way to start. I'm usually around 50%-ish, but I'm doing that comfort and snoring test. So I'm trying to use something that gives the patient hope. I always would get worried if a patient leaned back and went, and then I said, stick your jaw forward and snore, and they could still make the same snoring sound. I get scared. If they can make the same sound with their jaw jutted forward that they can make normally, I'm like, they just stuck their jaw forward a lot and they still make that loud snoring sound. I'm worried that maybe I can't pull their mandible to a comfortable three-dimensional position to stop that snoring sound. So, again, looking at the risk factors for either non-compliance or I wouldn't probably treat internal derangement, temporomandibular joint patients that had a lot of pain, discomfort. Most patients get better and you and I've talked about that too. Most patients get better in oral appliance therapy that are TMD patients. I would not be afraid to treat them overall. But if you're getting started, you just don't want all that risk. And so I try to keep it as simple as possible if I was getting started.
Excellent. Well, I knew this would happen after I ranted and raved about how physicians don't talk to us. A member has written in and said, I am in Canada. I have physicians send patients for oral appliance when they have a sleep study and refuse to wear CPAP. Wonderful. That's great news. Can you come to my office and tell me how to do that? I think physicians often think oral appliances only if you've tried everything else, and this looks like a case where a patient has refused CPAP.
Well, I will give you a tip for maybe helping the relationship with physicians. It's worked very well for me. I told you I keep these. I do them by quarters, so it could be 35, it could be 50, it could be 75. I only work 1 day a week doing dental sleep medicine. The rest of the time I teach and lecture and do studies and stuff for ProSomnus. So I have a very small, limited sleep practice. So in a quarter, I might do 50 cases like you saw in that last study. And so 50 cases, I make a registry. It talks about my pre and post HIs, patients' BMI, their ages, what device I used, all that kind of stuff. And then the data is interpreted and talks about percent improvements, something like that. I'll go to visit a physician and I'll drop those off quarterly with one of my business cards stapled to the top. But when I go in there, I don't ask them to send me patients. I don't ask them to trust me. Instead, I say, hey, I'm seeing a lot of sleep patients in my practice, and I'd like to get together with you if it's possible and meet and find out what are the kinds of things you need from me when I send you a patient for testing or when I send a patient that we think needs a CPAP. So that if they view me as a source of patients/income for them and their practice, they're going to be much more favorable. When I have that conversation, I would say at least 50% of the time, I am welcomed with open arms. And now we sit down and we talk to maybe the gatekeeper. Maybe I get time with the physician. And then I've just dropped off this thing and said, well, how do you get such good results with that? Now I can start to talk about the type of devices I use, the dosing, how it's changed. And sometimes, not always, sometimes I can change how they think about oral appliance therapy. And especially if, like we've got this qualification, this qualified dentist status in the United States. We've got the diplomate status from the American Board of Dental Sleep Medicine. And those can be impressive credentials to some physicians. Some physicians just say you're still a dentist. And so, but those are some of the things I use to try and get just a little bit of good face time with them.
Thank you. You alluded, Mark, to a thought I've had for a long time. And as being dentists and having a hard time with failure, because we're trained as basically microengineers of teeth. We pretty much can solve any problem, fix it on the spot.
100%.
But we're not trained to accept failure. And all I do is chronic pain, TMD, and sleep, which nobody learns in any dental school in the world ever, I think. So I've had to learn a lot of it my own. But I have a lot of people that I mentor, and they go, what do you do when you fail? Well, that's a really tough one to teach someone because we're not supposed to fail. Every root canal is supposed to be 100% effective. Every filling lasts forever. Every contact is tight and gums don't bleed, or you screwed up. But this is a very different world. This is three-dimensional biologic organisms that we don't control very much of.
It is. And it's so hard. In medicine, they're trained that you have this disease, let's say it's cancer, it's cardiovascular disease, whatever it is, and we're going to try and treat that. And we've got these different tools, and we'll pull them off the shelf and we'll apply them to you. And they may work or they may not work, and they have their percentages and they have their life expectancies for this treatment and that. And very early on, they learn that not every disease is treatable successfully. and some people die. The good news is we don't necessarily deal as much with the part that some people die. I'm not saying that they don't die because of obstructive sleep apnea. Of course they do. But we do have to get comfortable dealing with the idea that not every treatment and not every therapy works. My daughter has worked in several different capacities in and around dentistry, and she works for a medical billing company now, as well as working for me and running my sleep clinic. And she is really good because she's a sounding board, and she sees she is not a dentist, so she doesn't have that guilt feeling when we can't be successful that we often have. And so she'll say to me, "Dad, sometimes you just have to harden your heart." And now she doesn't mean that she doesn't want me to be caring and concerning. Of course she does. But sometimes you can't fix that. You can try. You can try this and that and everything, and I'll add vertical, I'll back the patient up, I'll do all this different stuff, but eventually you have to go, it's not working. It's not working. We've tried everything that I can know how to do, and it's not working. You have to go to CPAP, or you have to go to surgery. You have to try something else. The other part of that is if I'm operating at around 75% improvement, every Major League Baseball team, including your Blue Jays, 750 has never been achieved as a batting average. You're in the Hall of Fame if you hit 400.
Right.
And this is nearly double that. And so from opportunity to serve, opportunity to be successful, and how often you're successful, it's incredible. It's incredible. You know, if the Argonauts were scoring 100 points a game, it'd be different. If the Raptors were everybody was making every three, it'd be incredible. Instead, somebody who makes 60% of the threes they're going to be Hall of Fame in basketball. So the success ratio is quite high. But you're right, that comparison to dentistry, you have to put your head and your heart in a box that's different when you're doing dental sleep medicine than when you're doing dentistry. And I would argue you probably should have a little bit of that box going on in dentistry, because we can't fix everything either. We can't. I'm having an implant placed soon. It'll be my 5th implant, and it's on tooth number 3 that had a root canal. It had fractured before, had crowns. We tried to save it, and finally I lost the tooth. I'm 64, so that's going to happen, and I'm going to have another implant done. And that's just the way it goes. Even if you try to do everything right. I mean, a flossing machine, I don't clench or grind, but we can't win them all. But you got to harden your heart to that, because otherwise you'll stay up at night, or you'll drink too much or something. Yesterday was 420, you'll do something, whatever it is.
Right. That's a very good perspective.
That was a little joke for the pot smokers.
We got that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. We just grow it here and sell it to you guys. I think that's what we do.
Not a bad deal.
Another question just coming in. What's the realistic percentage of patients that need to be on combo therapy, i.e. CPAP and oral appliance? Do you have a sense of it?
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch that definition. I'm going to say combo therapy is any combination of multiple therapies. Could be weight loss and oral appliance. Could be positional and oral appliance. And I say that because I've had some really good success when we look at sleep studies, and we've seen that there's some positional quality to the patient's higher AHI when they're in supine, of course, no surprise. So, sometimes I can get them down another 3, 5, 7, 8 AHI points by sewing 3 tennis balls in the back of a t-shirt, giving them a slumber bump or a sleep worm or any of those kind of things that keep them off their back. And we'll move towards a much higher level of success. Some people can't sleep on their side, so that's a different issue. So combination therapy, broader definition. That was the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that if a patient is going to have an oral appliance made and they have a pretty high AHI score, or you're struggling with their treatment, you're not getting the kind of results, I would begin to introduce in the conversation with that patient, especially if they'd had a CPAP before and you were treating them, the possibility of combination therapy. And I would start to drop the hints that said, one of the reasons so many people struggle to wear a CPAP is sometimes the pressure in the mask, and although it's not really that high, but you get to 12 or 14 centimeters of water, and you think that's pretty high pressure in the mask. And if we put an oral appliance there that opens your airway, but we can't open it enough with the oral appliance, and you double that up with the mask, sometimes the mask is a lot more comfortable to wear. And it'd be like if I put you in a pair of running shoes, Nike Air Jordans, instead of a pair of high heels. It's going to be a lot more comfortable to wear. You're still going to have shoes on your feet, and you maybe wanted to go barefoot. Sorry, you can't go barefoot. But at least I can put you in a pair of comfortable Air Jordans instead of high heels. And so the CPAP mask at 4, 5, 6 pressure is going to be a lot easier to wear than at 12 or 14. And so I try to introduce that conversation in case we end up going that way when you see some of that evolving. But the combination therapy is certainly alive and well. I don't do it very often. In that 25% where we have the patients are not responding to oral appliance therapy, that's the population where combination therapy comes into play with regards CPAP and oral appliance.
Great, thank you. Next question. Appliance selection is important on the front end. I'm hearing my own voice. My sense is meeting the monitoring requirements is that have become the standard of care in the back end of the process. I might have bumbled that up with my mic still on. Did you get a sense of that? Do you want me to do that again for you, Mark?
No, I can read the question too. So no.
Oh, you can read it? Okay.
Appliance selection is important on the front end. My sense is meeting the monitoring requirements that have become the standard of care in the back end of the process. So what we don't have a lot of monitoring requirements today in terms of compliance, et cetera. And so, but we're going to see more of that, I think. I think you're going to very quickly see in the next year, but certainly the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see a lot more sensor technology become embedded in the oral appliances, especially with these milled platforms that we have. You can mill a slot, you can drop a Braybon chip in it, and they hold up a lot better that way. And I think we're going to see probably pulse oximeters as well as other compliance monitoring information be made available in routinely in oral appliance therapy. And that's going to meet that back end requirement. It's also going to help us if they could put a pulse oximeter in and it fed to Bluetooth. You could help me titrate that patient. We talked about speed of titration. There's a technique that Guy Yatros teaches where he uses a night owl from Ectosense, sends the patient home, and each night for 4 nights or 5 nights, he advances the mandible 1 millimeter each night. And then he gets the data from each of those positions, understanding that the patient might not be terribly comfortable at all those positions, but he gets the data at all those positions. And then he says, at 2 millimeters, the patient's ODI score was great. So then he starts them back over at 0 and walks them up to that 2 millimeters in whatever comfortable time frame he needs. Matrix Plus is another responsiveness testing indicator that allows us to say this patient will respond and they will respond at this position. That's fantastic information and data. I love what Remers has done, what Suresh has done with the Matrix technology. I just absolutely love it. I adore it. The challenge for me is always how much does it cost? How do we get paid? And there's some point in time where you start to balance those two things out, and that's always the challenge. So I think as payers, and maybe this will change for you in Canada, but why the health insurance plans in Canada would not cover oral appliance therapy totally escapes me, especially when we have some of the kind of efficacy and effectiveness data that we have today. I think, and especially if we have some of the compliance data that we haven't had in the past, you may see that change, and that would be kind of exciting for you up there.
Let me give you my biased answer to at least my province in Ontario. CPAP therapy, because we're socialized medicine, it's free. By the time the patient gets their sleep study and has their sit down with a sleep doc and a prescribed CPAP, our benevolent provincial government has an assisted devices program that basically pays for any DME they may require, wheelchair, commode, and oral CPAP. So a patient gets to the counter and they have to shell out $375 for a $2,500 machine, which they can then get reimbursed from their extended medical health at their employer if it's a big enough company, or they come to my office and get a bill for $2,900. It's real simple when you start sitting down and with your reject and your approve button stamp. And I spend a lot of time educating my patients to be, vocal and advocate for themselves. But I also tell them, look, if I was on the other side approving claims, it's really easy to approve 10 CPAPs for every oral appliance, because in the end, it's all about money. It's not really about health. It's all about money. It's an insurance game.
I totally agree. And David, here's what I would tell you that I think should be encouraging. That AHRQ study that was commissioned by the government basically says CPAP doesn't work, and they're going to quit paying for it. Now, now right now they pay in the States, they pay for CPAP or oral appliance. CPAP and oral appliances are both categorized as DME. And so now one angle, one perspective that you could take as a dentist in Canada is, how do we, as a group of dentists dedicated to dental sleep medicine, how do we get either oral appliances categorized as a DME or at least covered by the National Health Insurance? Because that's another route, especially under the umbrella of, oh, by the way, when you look at Revenue Canada and say you're spending all this money on CPAP and they don't work, look at the study, maybe that opens the door for you, just like I'm thinking it's going to open the door for us from a prescription standpoint. That could be an exciting change for you. Now, it's a double-edged sword, because once government's paying for it, usually the reimbursements go down.
I wish I was 30 years younger and
That'd be
have
exciting.
if I was 30 years younger and twice the energy, I would take on that challenge, but I'm over the
Amen.
hill. Yeah.
Amen.
Okay. So Mark, listen, I really want to thank you so very much. You've been so easy to work with. As your bio says, you are presenting it in a very light and informative manner. You have a vast knowledge of Canada, which warms our hearts, because a lot of folks don't even know how many provinces we have. Wendy, I want to thank you for your ongoing support, and thanks for your supporters for calling you out, because you're working hard. I think you share, as I do, the frustrations of trying to launch dental sleep medicine in Canada and the uphill battle it is with our medical colleagues. Do you have anything else you want to say to that before we go?
I will say a few things, and just to give some encouragement. I always like to end on a good note. I am encouraged by the cooperation that I see between, I'd say the starting cooperation between a lot of the doctors I work with and sleep physicians. A lot of their total base of oral appliance therapy in their practice is coming from referrals from sleep physicians. I think that we will see a shift the more that patients are aware of the opportunity to have an oral appliance rather than CPAP. I've always deep down felt that that's where the drive is going to come from. Once the patients demand the treatment, everyone else will have to toe the line. In Canada, I do see a very experience across the provinces, and I know you seem to have more challenges in Ontario, and I think, to your point, it's because CPAP is covered by the provincial government. Who knows what's going to happen with a lot of, with money that's gone into healthcare during COVID. Maybe they'll start to look at a more economical solution. I believe oral appliance is that, because I think, as I have learned through listening to Dr. Murphy and many of our internal webinars, that after, 18 months, CPAP becomes more expensive treatment for a patient over oral appliance. And more money was spent on cleaning your CPAP last year than all the money that was spent on paid out by insurance companies in the US. So I do think that we will see change, and change will be driven by patient demand. There's no question in my mind that more people would prefer to wear an oral appliance to bed than wear a CPAP. As well, we should be looking at it. It's a green option. And who knows, maybe the carbon credit will be the one that drives us to oral appliance. Anyway.
Well, Wendy and or Mark, my closing thought is, in your thought about patient demand, I just think social media has changed so much in the world, and I think it's educated so many more people, sometimes for the negative, but I get patients who come to me simply because they figured it out on their own, or they were scrolling around. And I think the more that patients know there is more than one option out there, they'll find us. And if we provide a good service and it gets back to their family doc or a sleep doc, that's another way of doing it. That's an uncontrolled source of education that we, of course, can only witness from the side. What are your thoughts about that, either Mark or Wendy, about patients educating themselves through social media?
I think it's an incredible opportunity because today you can't turn on the TV or open a newspaper without seeing something about sleep or mattresses or new medications or something like that. The number of patents that are being approved for unusual devices like the tongue vibrator device to stimulate your pharyngeal muscles, pads under your tongue and magnets. There's all kinds of stuff going on out there. So the awareness level is quite high. And I think that helps. That helps. Unfortunately, a lot of the patients that get attracted to some of that media are looking for $50, $90, and $100 solutions. They're not looking for an oral appliance that's covered by medical insurance, but that's okay. That's our job to take them that second level of education. Wendy, your thoughts?
I totally agree. I do think there's a huge opportunity for patient education. And as well, I really believe that when they can have those conversations with their physician, whether that even be a sleep physician, because many of them don't even think that they need to see a sleep physician or even know a sleep physician exists, but their GP. And I think part of the education is really going to be that we, as in the dental community, we need to educate the GP. They just really don't know as much as they should. We have this expectation that they probably do, but I know from firsthand experience that GPs just automatically think CPAP, and they often will even prescribe CPAP for their patients under the assumption that when they go to a CPAP clinic, that it's being overseen by a sleep physician. And we know that's not necessarily the case. They can, get CPAPs at lots of different businesses. The other thing, with regards to that is that they're not following their patients up. And I found that out I will say that I can't draw on any study, but that was from a personal experience we had with a media campaign a few years ago. I took 10 days answering calls to patients wanting to know about oral appliance therapy. And they were like some of them in very rural areas across Canada that just really don't have access to any care. There's a huge opportunity for education, especially here. I mean, I think that in the US, there's more of everything, and there's more access to information because there's some competition, and that we're not, as dentists in Canada, we're not really allowed to, I'm including myself in that group, but to advertise. And so it's really hard. How do you get the message out that you have a service to provide that you're not allowed to advertise? So.
Well, Wendy, Bianca, who's with us tonight, is also our director of communications and the technical wizard that makes me look good. She's growing our brand through social media, and I'm just thinking out loud, Bianca, how can we extend that to the general public as well? Because it sounds like we're all agreeing, patients educate themselves. Not only do we want to educate more dental colleagues, but if the spill-off is that as many patients find out, oh, oral appliance, how do I find out? Where do I go? Canadian Academy of what? Okay, let's go there. So maybe that's a subject for future discussion, maybe even another webinar. We might want to bring in people that know about that kind of stuff. Does that make sense, Bianca?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the education is so important. I mean, I'm obviously not an expert in the dental industry, but if I were a patient with these sleep and I guess problems or issues, the first thing I would do would be to research it and probably look at YouTube videos, look for articles. My first step wouldn't be to go to my doctor, I think, and maybe that's just my generation, to just do the research first and know that it's definitely on the internet somewhere and I can find more answers faster that way.
It's called Dr. Google.
Yeah, so that's actually would be my first step, and I think that's why it's so important. I don't know the details about the limitations on advertising for dental practices and such, but it's definitely an asset for patients.
So that's something we want to think of doing in our second phase, just to get the word out, because we've all experienced it. Patients come to us with, I've heard this on TV, or I want this done, sort of thing. All right. Well, listen, it's getting on. I really appreciate everyone's attendance. Thank you so much, Mark, for coming.